Welcome back to another episode of Trip Report. First of all, I just want to give a huge thanks to everybody with all the positive feedback that I've gotten so far. I really have wanted to do this for a long time, and I was on the fence about the solo episodes. I figured I'd sprinkle them in here and there as I waited to be able to get more people tracked down to do the interviews. And some of the feedback was people said that they enjoyed the solo episodes the most, and that's great because I have plenty to share. So yeah, thanks for listening again. As promised in the last episode, I'm going to dive into my first bad trip today. Let's just dive right into it. I had that 5-gram hero dose experience and super beneficial, took a lot away from it, felt on cloud 9 for weeks after that one. And as time went on, I kind of throttled back my dosage. There was a few people that I took through their first time, and I found that 2 gram was the sweet dose to make sure that they had the visual changes that I think is important to experience with psychedelics. But at 2 grams, it didn't really seem to have the mind fuckery that the higher doses can have. So 2 grams feels like a really good introductory foot in the door dose to make sure that you're getting what you're looking for, but it seems unlikely to have a difficult experience with that dosage. So for the next maybe year, I think that's kind of what I ran with. And especially if I was going to be out in public, if I was at the beach or in Joshua Tree on a hike, something along those lines, it was like 2 grams was that sweet spot to really be able to appreciate nature, feel strong in my body, and not worry about any of the too heavy of things coming in to not be able to go about my day normally. So after a while, I decided it was time to go into another high dose again. I didn't really think that it was necessary to go to the hero dose, but I thought it was fascinating, that 4-gram experience that I had previously where the alien language came to me. So I thought, well, let's do the 4-gram again. And I thought I had myself perfectly prepared for it. I was like, okay, I'm going to start laying down in bed. I'm just going to take the 4 grams, lay down, put eye shades on, have headphones on, and just go for the ride and see where it goes. And I think there was a level of maybe cockiness that was associated with it because I hadn't had a bad trip yet. So I was just in my mind, this is how they do it in the therapeutic setting with the eye shades and the music. So I'll be totally set up, ready to go. This is going to be the perfect experience. So I took the tea, or I don't even remember how I prepped it at the time, and I laid down, and I would say the effects kicked in within about 15 minutes. And it was visuals coming in, but they weren't colorful. So it was the same visuals I always saw, the same types of patterns and everything, but there was no color in them. So that was kind of strange to me to just see kind of whites and grays fading through. And if any color came in, it was very mild, almost like a light pastel. But this is the first time that I didn't have vivid visuals. So I'm just letting my mind go and wandering through. And then it just took a hard turn, and out of nowhere, I got this bizarre message of, you're not supposed to be here. And it seemed almost threatening. So I got nervous because it was like, what is this message that I'm not supposed to be in this realm? I've been here a bunch of times before and it was cool. We were all good. And that was the message that came through. And so then my mind started wandering. And the next message that came through was that mushrooms were the biblical forbidden fruit. It wasn't the apple that we were all led to believe in the story of Adam and Eve. And so my mind started to justify, you found this forbidden fruit, which gives you access to knowledge that you're not supposed to have. And now there's punishment to be associated with it. So the hard thing to explain is that when your mind is rationalizing these things, there's nothing that you can read. There's nothing anybody can tell you because you are you. So when your belief comes through, it is what it is. Like, there's no way to rationally, like, in my mind, I should be able to say, well, I've done 5 grams. I've done 4 grams before. I've done 3.5 grams and 2 grams a ton of times, and I never OD'd. This is the same batch of mushrooms that I've done previously. So this one can't be tainted or wrong, but the rational side of me was gone. So I had this feeling that I had OD'd, essentially, I guess, or that it was, or I was on the verge of ODing and what I took was a poison and that I was going to die. And that's a very hard thing to wrap my head around. And again, from a rational standpoint, I should know these things aren't poisonous. I've seen all the research studies that are published and all of that. But then what my mind told me when I thought that was, oh no, you are in your own simulation here. So all of those things that you saw about research studies and people on podcasts and everything else of, other people who have talked about taking mushrooms, that's all BS that led you to take this thing that killed you. And it was like, you do this to yourself over and over and over again. Every life you come into, you find this forbidden fruit and then you kill yourself. And that's what happens. And then my brain's just still going down this dark rabbit hole of my ex-wife was still training horses in Mexico at the time. And it was like, oh, she's now going to not be able to hear from me, and then going to have to send somebody to check in, and the dogs are stuck in the house alone. And then somebody has to tell my parents whenever whoever comes in here and finds my dead body on the ground. And it was just the most horrific things I could think of. And I was like, why did I do this? Life was tough for a moment, but I seemed to have, let a lot of that difficulty go, and I was on the right track. And then somehow it was all taken away from me because of this weird forbidden fruit thing. So it was scary to just have that thought process and to have no one around to be able to tell me otherwise. And I guess rationally, I could have picked up my phone and called somebody and said what was going on. There are a lot of hotlines out there now for people that are struggling with psychedelic experiences. But in my mind, because I was on the other side, my phone wouldn't have service anymore. Like, even if I picked this kaleidoscope of craziness up and could manage to hit dial and call somebody, in my mind, it was just going to be a busy signal, or that it was incapable of calling out because I was in a different realm or different dimension to where I couldn't contact anybody anymore. So again, that didn't help me either. So I'm just spiraling out of control. And I finally just opened my eyes. I was like, there's no benefit to me staring at these gray visions anymore, especially if I've died. So I got up out of bed, walked down the hallway, and then my dogs were both there, and they looked terrified. Like, the look on their face was like, who is this? What is going on here? And I've never had them look at me with that level of hesitancy or fear. So I was like, oh no, what are the chances that they're going to attack me right now because I'm not the owner that they know? Or do they sense something in me that, because animals have this extra sense? Or then the thought came in, oh no, they just know that I'm dying. Because in hospitals, you always hear about dogs and cats, that various ones that they'll go around to different patients an hour or so before they die. And so I was like, oh no, both of these dogs know that I'm dying. This is it. So I got a little closer to him, nice and slow approach, because in my mind, I'm still like, are they going to snap on me and bite me, and we're going to be in a real mess here because I'm on 4 grams of mushrooms getting attacked by a dog. But I reached out to Bullet, who is a short-haired bull terrier. And as soon as my hand hit his fur, it felt like I had touched a chow or like some super fluffy dog. And I've never felt that softness of him before. And when I looked down, it was like the hair was growing up around my fingers, and it was like pulsing in and out, and it was so bizarre. So I just pet him a little bit, and then he calmed down. And then I reached over to Toki, the other dog, pet him. He calmed down too. And I was like, okay, we're good. But in my mind, it was still like they knew that I was dying. So the next thing that came into my head was that the hallucination effect of psychedelics, like when you start to see things move and swim and all that kind of stuff in your vision, it was that is the transition to death. When people are on their deathbed, it's not uncommon for the last few words to come out of their mouth are, wow, this is so beautiful. And if you've never had a psychedelic event in your entire life, and you finally see what your brain is capable of with the visual hallucinations of psychedelics, if you were to see that for the first time on your deathbed, you would say, wow, this is unbelievable. I can't believe that the world can do this. So again, I rationalize it to myself, okay, I'm seeing all these visuals because I'm in the transition period to dying right now. And it's just one thing coming at me after another, and I would try to rationalize it, and then my mind would throw something else at me to stamp that idea down. So, and mind you, also at this time, what messed me up too was the visuals, other than whenever I had initially, pet the dog. When I looked around the room, it wasn't that everything being cartoonish kind of look anymore. It was almost like I hit the eye of the storm. Like usually on I mean, even like a 3-gram dose from start to finish, I see everything kind of cartoonish and extra round, extra HD. And it was almost as if like everything was just normal. Like I wasn't even on mushrooms. And then I tried putting music on and music sounded normal. It wasn't that in the head, like truly feeling the music situation. So that's what made me feel like, oh no, you're beyond the hallucination point and you have passed into not death, but my brain rationalized it, and it wasn't really hell, but it rationalized it as like a purgatory. And it was because you didn't transition to death the way that you're supposed to by the body finally giving up on you, or, a tragic accident or something like that, that I'm not allowed to transition to the other side. So in my mind, it was like, I'm stuck in this house, in this alternate reality forever. And so that was terrifying. You know what I mean? This thought of just like being alone, and like the dogs were there. So, I mean, it was like, okay, I had them, but I couldn't rationalize it. The thought process was, if I go to one of the neighbors' houses and knock on the door, there's no one there. I'm the last person on this planet. It is what it is. I think maybe at that time I thought I even couldn't leave the house, that I was just like trapped in this house for eternity. Now, at this point, I was at the end of my rope. I wanted it to end. I was trying to think, what can I do to kill this? What can I do to make this trip stop? And I remember reading, I don't know if it was in a forum or something along those lines, that dairy has a negative impact on the potency of psilocybin. So people would say, either fast all the way up to your ceremony, or just make sure that you're not consuming the mushrooms with dairy, or it has a negative impact on the potency. So I thought, okay, cool. Let's just consume some dairy and see what that does for me. So I go to the refrigerator, open it up, and I reach for the carton of milk, and I see it's almond milk. And I was like, damn, well, there's no dairy there. So I go to the freezer, open that up, and there's 2 pints of ice cream. I grab those, and damn, again, both coconut milk based ice cream. So my ego jumps right back in again, and it's convincing me, like, see, this simulation that you're living in, it trying to convince you that you've been healthy by consuming these dairy alternatives, but now that it's time for you to consume these mushrooms, your simulation tricked you so that you didn't have dairy on hand. So you now are going to die because you don't have dairy to counteract this poison that you've consumed. So again, it was just like my mind was messing with me nonstop. There was no way that I could rationalize that I was not dying. So regardless, I took a few swigs from the almond milk, and then I had a few spoonfuls of the ice cream. And in that state, they tasted terrible. Like even ice cream just didn't taste good. So I had a few spoonfuls, and I just finally relinquished the fact that this isn't going to do anything for me and I'm going to die. As my brain's trying to wrap itself around all of this nonsense, I was just pacing back and forth. Like I wish I had a camera in the house to see what a lunatic I looked like, because it was just, I literally just paced back and forth across the entire house, probably 100 times. And I was just looking at the clock and was thinking, okay, I know from point of ingestion that it's roughly 1 hour until I hit the peak, which I'm at the peak by now. There's no doubt about that. And I've got about 4 hours to go until I'm back to baseline. So I would look at the time and then pace back and forth a little bit. And I would look at the time again, and it would, if it did even move. So, I mean, I'm probably looking at the phone repeatedly, but your sense of time is just gone when you're on high dose psychedelics. And so it would either be not have moved or only like a minute or two. So it was like, okay, time's broken. It's not moving right. So I'm definitely in a different realm right now. And I can't just wait this clock out. Like it is what it is. We're done. So I got to the point where I think as time went by and my brain started to land back into the neutral zone and I could start to think a little more coherently again, what I thought was, okay, if I survive this, or if I do die and my body's here, I need to leave a message to everybody else about what went down. So I think like I had a journal there, or at least a piece of paper, because I can't find any older journals that I had, which would be great for this podcast. But I think I left a note that had said, like, I did not overdose. It was an accident and I'm sorry, or something along those lines. And then at the time we had 2 of the walls in the house painted in that black chalkboard paint, so you could write with chalk on the walls. And I left all sorts of messages. It put like, mushrooms are the forbidden fruit. Don't do mushrooms. Don't do these ever again. Like, this is that it's not what everybody says that it is. It was like all these weird, cryptic, bizarre messages. And then I went around the house, and every single thing that was even remotely related to mushrooms, like, because I'd been collecting artwork and stuff over the years, books, all that kind of stuff, it was like, that has to go. I can't have anybody see anything that is even a reminder of what mushrooms are, because no one else should do this. Like, this is not, people should not be doing mushrooms. So I threw everything into a trash bag, took it out, put it in the trash bag, put it at the curb, and was like, this is it. I'm done. I'm not messing with this anymore. It's not worth it. And I went right back to just like pacing back and forth. And so still watching the clock, finally to the point where I see, okay, it's an hour later, it's 2 hours later, but there was still no visual distortion. I mean, maybe some of the paintings in the house were a little more vivid, but all of the normal swimming stuff and all of that, it just was non-existent. So that's what still kind of messed me up, was it was like, I'm not tripping right now, but I feel like I'm dying, and I'm on 4 grams of mushrooms, which is a pretty legit dose. So I, just go back to pacing, back and forth, back and forth. Yeah, eventually things just, the time passed by enough that the rational mind started to take over again. And I realized, okay, I survived this. Like, it was, you're not dying, you didn't die. And then I think like maybe the last thing I thought was, maybe every time that you do take mushrooms, even though in this existence that we're in where you make it to the other side, your consciousness thinks that it survived and you do go forward. But in another realm, you did leave a body behind, and all of the people around you have to deal with your passing. So I was like, that seems kind of weird. And then the other rational thing that came into thought, which I kind of side with nowadays, is you did die in a way. And you always hear people talk about ego death. And I think what it is the part of you that you needed to let go of, that part dies. So it's, I've said before, after a trip, especially the high dose ones, I feel like I had a reset. But especially going back to that very first experience ever, seeing that phoenix in the clouds, that symbol of death and rebirth, the thought process that I have is all of these times whenever I go into this realm of thinking that I had died, and often it's accompanied with a lot of going back and reviewing life all over again, like going back to childhood and looking at all sorts of different memories that I went through. And it's always also accompanied with the feeling of sadness of letting people down, not telling enough people I love them, not giving enough people hugs, all that sort of stuff. So the messages that came through were very profound. So all being said and done with this, I think that I love the explanation of there being no bad trips, just difficult ones, because this was terrifying. It was very difficult to go through this experience, but on the backside of it, it gave me the sense inside to tell everybody in my life, the people that I cared about, that I loved them more. And that was something that was kind of bound up in me for most of my life. And what I found fascinating, and I think it was this one, it was probably this trip that I unpacked it. But since I got stationed out here, met my ex-wife, we got married, was adopted into her family. They were unbelievable people. And one thing that I noticed with her family was that every time somebody left the house, they always said, they would say, bye, I love you. The term I love you was thrown around so much with her family. And it was like all the time. And it almost, like, it took me a while. It was weird for me to even say it to them until I kind of broke down some of these barriers. And then it was because it felt like weird to use the L word. And maybe even, I used it with my ex-wife, but probably not as much as I should have. And then it was even with her, it was like, okay, this feels right because it's my wife. But with the rest of the family, it still felt kind of weird until I was able to break all those barriers down. And then it was, years later, because since this experience, I've had many of these believe that I have died situations, with my most recent ayahuasca experience being hands down the worst of them. But it's often the same message that comes through, is make sure that you need to live in the moment and truly appreciate every last minute you get on this earth, and all of the interactions that you have with the people around you that you care about. You need to let them know that you care about them. I noticed the same pattern of behavior with my current fiance and her family is that, every time they hang up the phone, every time they leave the house, whatever, same thing. I love you. And it occurred to me that that was not part of my upbringing. I knew that my parents did love me, but that was never a term, or that was never a phrase that was used among, we'd hang up the phone and say goodbye. There was no, or, I'd leave the house. I would leave the airport and just say, see you next time. Like, it was so weird to, with my own immediate family, not use that term, I love you. And after, this and a few of the other, I guess I call them near-death experiences, but near-death trips, I eventually got to the point where I was like, I'm going to change this. Like, I've heard people before talk about generational trauma, and I never understood it until some more recent ayahuasca trips, and then diving deeper into asking my parents about their parents and that sort of thing. And I now understand the generational trauma. And this is a prime example of it. I don't know how often my mother or father's parents told them that they loved them, but that was a pattern that wasn't passed down to us. So I saw two other families of people that I was very close with that displayed this pattern. So I now have to assume that's the normal pattern for most of society, yet that wasn't part of my family. So my generational trauma that I learned about that I needed to break was to start this. So I made it my goal to, every time that I get off the phone or leave Pittsburgh to visit the parents, I tell them all the time, I love you. And when I just occasionally text my brothers, I love you. I talk to friends now, I love you. Like, I just make sure that I say it as often as I can to break that paradigm. And I think that that's what the generational trauma side of where psychedelics are powerful to bring these things to the surface and give you the ability to break the pattern. So yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway that I had from this thinking that I had died experience, was just a true appreciation for my life on this earth, and then being able to kind of open up more and express my feelings toward other people. I'm a firm believer in the quotation of, you can't love others until you love yourself. And it was years after this experience until I got deep enough into these journeys to unpack, to clear enough of the trauma to truly love myself, to be able to love others. And we'll get into that for sure as we go into the future trip reports. But I think this was breaking the ice of the really deep work that I did to truly heal the emotional trauma that was buried within me. And this, I think, scratched the surface. And then it was only until, honestly, about a month ago, until I discovered why I was no longer welcome in the mushroom realm. But that's something that I'll get into in a later podcast. But we'll wrap it up there. I've been thinking about what I'm going to do for future solo casts, since there's been a lot of positive feedback on doing these. So I think I really want to do salvia, because that's another quote unquote legal psychedelic that I had some fascinating experiences with. And then I think I also want to do my first LSD and also fake LSD, my actual first experience with that, which is quite dangerous. So those will be coming down the line. But until then, enjoy this one, and thanks for listening. Love you guys.